By the late 1970s, Jeff Berlin had become one of the most respected bassists in jazz fusion. What makes his story unusual isn't just the musicians he worked with. It's that he reached the top without trying to sound like anyone else. While many bass players were influenced by rock, blues, or even other bassists, Berlin built his musical identity from classical training, jazz harmony, and an obsession with understanding music itself. That approach would lead him to perform with Bill Bruford, Allan Holdsworth, Scott Henderson, John McLaughlin, and some of the finest musicians in modern fusion. It would also make him one of the most respected and sometimes controversial teachers in the bass world. So how did a classically trained violin student become one of the defining voices of electric bass? The answer begins long before the fusion movement reached its peak. Before we continue, subscribe now, like this video, comment, and share. Jeff Berlin was born in New York in 1953 into a family where music played an important role. His first instrument wasn't the bass, it was the violin. Years of classical study taught him to read music fluently, understand phrasing, and think about melody rather than simply technique. Those lessons would stay with him for the rest of his career. Like many young musicians during the 1960s, Berlin became fascinated by rock and jazz, eventually picking up the electric bass. But instead of learning by copying records note for note, he approached the instrument through music theory and harmony. To him, the bass wasn't just a rhythm instrument. It was another voice in the ensemble. That mindset immediately separated him from many players of his generation and prepared him for something much bigger. To continue growing, however, he needed to be surrounded by musicians who challenged him every day. That opportunity arrived at Berklee College of Music. When Jeff Berlin entered Berklee College of Music, he found exactly the environment he had been searching for. Students were expected to master harmony, ear training, arranging, improvisation, and composition, not simply become better instrumentalists. Berlin embraced that philosophy. His classical background gave him a strong technical foundation, but Berklee expanded the way he thought about music. He became fascinated by improvisation and began developing a bass style that blended lyrical phrasing with sophisticated harmony. Rather than filling every measure with notes, he focused on making each phrase meaningful. His goal wasn't to impress listeners with speed, it was to communicate musically. That philosophy would remain at the center of his playing throughout his career. As jazz and rock continued blending into the emerging fusion movement, Berlin realized he had found the perfect musical landscape for his ideas. Soon, opportunities outside the classroom would begin to appear. By the mid-1970s, jazz fusion had become one of the most adventurous genres in contemporary music. Bands like Weather Report, Return to Forever, and Mahavishnu Orchestra were pushing musicians to new technical and creative levels. Jeff Berlin entered that world with something different to offer. His solos reflected the phrasing of a horn player. His lines showed the discipline of classical music, and his groove remained strong even in the most complex compositions. Other musicians quickly noticed. Berlin wasn't simply another fast bassist. He was a complete musician who understood composition as deeply as performance. That reputation soon reached one of progressive rock's most respected drummers. Bill Bruford had recently left Yes and King Crimson behind to explore jazz fusion, and he was looking for a bassist capable of handling demanding compositions without sacrificing musicality. Their collaboration would become one of the defining partnerships of Jeff Berlin's career. When Bill Bruford began building his new fusion band in the late 1970s, he wasn't searching for a bassist who could simply keep time. He needed someone who could navigate odd meters, complex harmony, and extended improvisation while still making the music feel natural. Jeff Berlin was the perfect fit. The partnership officially began with Bill Bruford's debut solo album, Feels Good to Me, released in 1977, featuring Allan Holdsworth on guitar and Dave Stewart on keyboards. That recording marked the start of a legendary quartet, setting the stage for their landmark 1979 follow-up, One of a Kind, which cemented the group as one of the definitive forces in progressive jazz fusion. Listening to those recordings today, it's easy to understand why Berlin attracted so much attention. His bass wasn't buried in the mix. It became an equal voice in the conversation, whether doubling intricate melodies, responding to Holdsworth's improvisations, or locking tightly with Bruford's constantly shifting rhythms. Berlin demonstrated remarkable musical control. What impressed fellow musicians wasn't simply his technique. It was his ability to make extraordinarily difficult music sound fluid and expressive. The success of these albums established Jeff Berlin as one of the leading bassists of the new fusion generation. But the band was only beginning to explore its potential. The collaboration continued with Gradually Going Tornado in 1980, an album many bass players still consider one of Jeff Berlin's finest recorded performances. By then, the chemistry within the band had become unmistakable. Bruford's inventive drumming challenged every musician to think differently. Dave Stewart filled the arrangements with sophisticated harmonic ideas. Berlin responded by expanding the role of the bass even further. Instead of simply outlining chord changes, he created counter-melodies, rhythmic dialogue, and melodic phrases that became part of the compositions themselves. Tracks such as Joe Frazier and The Sliding Floor remain masterclasses in musical interaction rather than technical exhibition. At a time when many fusion musicians were showcasing speed, Berlin focused on clarity and phrasing. Every fast passage had direction. Every solo told a story. His performances demonstrated that virtuosity meant very little unless it served the music. That philosophy became one of the defining characteristics of his career. As his reputation grew, other leading musicians began inviting him into their own projects. Following his work with Bill Bruford, Jeff Berlin became one of the most sought-after bassists in the jazz fusion community. His resume expanded to include collaborations with Allan Holdsworth, Scott Henderson, Dennis Chambers, T. Levitz, Richard Halabeek, John McLaughlin, and numerous internationally respected musicians. Although each artist had a different musical language, Berlin adapted without losing his own identity. His playing remained instantly recognizable. A warm, articulate tone, strong melodic phrasing, exceptional time, and a deep understanding of harmony. Unlike many session musicians, Berlin rarely sounded as though he was simply fitting into someone else's music. Instead, his presence often elevated the entire ensemble. These collaborations also reinforced another important aspect of his reputation. He wasn't admired only by bass players. Pianists, guitarists, drummers, and composers valued his musicianship because he approached every performance from the perspective of the composition rather than the instrument. That respect would eventually lead him toward another role, one that became just as influential as his performing career: teaching. By the mid-1980s, Jeff Berlin had already earned the respect of the fusion community. But after years of collaborating with some of the genre's biggest names, he wanted to present music that reflected his own artistic vision. That desire led to his solo career. In 1985, he released Champion, an album that showcased not only his technical ability, but also his skills as a composer and bandleader. Rather than filling the record with extended bass solos, Berlin focused on writing memorable compositions where every musician had room to contribute. Over the following decades, albums such as Taking Notes, Lumpy Jazz, and Jack Songs revealed another side of his musicianship. His influences reached far beyond jazz fusion. Classical music, bebop, swing, blues, and traditional jazz all became part of his musical language. Listening to these recordings, one thing becomes clear. Jeff Berlin never viewed the bass as the center of attention. He viewed it as one voice within a complete musical conversation. That philosophy would soon become the foundation of his work as an educator. Jeff Berlin has never been known for playing it safe or holding back his opinions. Throughout his career as an educator, he openly and often fiercely attacked methods that the bass world accepted without question. His most famous crusade was his vocal stance against practicing with a metronome. While most teachers consider the metronome essential, Berlin argued the exact opposite, that practicing music with a mechanical click actually ruins a musician's natural feel for time. To Berlin, human musical time is organic and flexible, whereas a metronome is rigid and artificial. His outspoken comments sparked intense debates across music schools, forums, and magazines. Some praised his willingness to challenge orthodoxy, others strongly disagreed. Berlin welcomed the confrontation. He didn't care about pleasing the consensus. He wanted musicians to wake up, ditch mechanical shortcuts, and focus on genuine harmonic and rhythmic understanding. Whether discussing education, sight reading, or practice habits, he challenged students to pursue lifelong musical intelligence rather than quick technical tricks. And even those who clashed with his methods couldn't deny the formidable intellect behind them. When people discuss the defining bassists of jazz fusion, names like Jaco Pastorius, Stanley Clarke, Anthony Jackson, and John Patitucci often lead the conversation. Jeff Berlin belongs in that company, not because he tried to imitate them, but because he followed an entirely different path. Throughout his career, Berlin demonstrated that technical mastery is only meaningful when supported by musical understanding. His recordings with Bill Bruford remain essential, listening for anyone interested in modern bass playing, while his solo albums continue to reveal new details with every listen. His influence extends far beyond the records themselves. Many of today's professional bassists first encountered Berlin through his instructional clinics, magazine columns, educational videos, or masterclasses. For decades, he has encouraged musicians to think beyond the instrument in their hands, to study harmony, to develop their ears, to read music, to understand the role every note plays inside a composition. Those ideas have shaped thousands of players around the world. And while musical styles continue to evolve, the principles Berlin has defended throughout his career remain remarkably consistent. Music first, technique second. That simple philosophy may be the most important lesson he has ever taught. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next video.